And Metro, can you give a warm welcome to those listening online and watching online? Come on, Metro. Yeah, come on. Well, how we doing? Anybody glad to be in church? Let me just encourage those who are online. I know there's all kinds of reasons that you're watching from your phone or from your boat or from up north, and we're jealous, okay? But there are others who just haven't got back in the habit of being home. We want to encourage you to join us in person. There's something special that happens when we're together. There really is. Anybody in the room want to say something about that? There's something special that happens when we're in the room together, and Christians need to do this. So for those of you who are joining us online or in this room, I think you could have done anything today. You have a lot of opportunities in life, just like anybody does, and you chose to be in church. And I think that's a good thing. You chose to gather online for church. You chose to get your soul around the things of God a little bit. And I don't know what draws you here, but let me tell you something. I think you know this. There is not a lot in our culture that wants to lift your heart toward God. There's not a lot in culture that wants to do your soul well. Am I right? We get caught up in the busyness of life and the stress of life. I just think that so many of us get caught up in the busyness of just trying to make a living and trying to keep up with all the demands. And I'm telling you, we need this time. Don't ever get lazy. Let me tell you something. Do not ever get lazy with your time seeking after God on purpose together in a church environment, because there's something that happens here. We have a chance to redial what matters to us, refocus on what matters to us. We have a chance to retune our soul into truly what matters in the long run of the human experience. Am I right? So this is our opportunity, and let's go after it today together. Amen? Amen. Anybody encouraged to be in the house today? Come on. All right, so we have been in this, I think, a great little series called Truth or Lie, and we've been talking about this idea that all of us have doubts, questions about God, faith, the Bible, Jesus, all of it. Christians doubt, non-Christians doubt. It's part of the human experience, and I don't know if it's possible to answer all of those questions and all those doubts in a most thorough, persuasive way. But friends, I do think that they deserve a conversation, and I do think those doubts and questions deserve a reasonable, thoughtful response. Amen? And so we want to go after that a little bit. And I don't know if you spent any time with us on this series. Anybody been here for part of this series? Anybody at all? I hope that you've been encouraged, but we've been talking about some big things. I mean, real big things. Like one of my favorite weeks that we've done is this idea of how can a modern people like us, how can people watching on the World Wide Web, I don't even know what that is, right? Like how can a modern people still have faith? Is that even possible that smart people, like some of y'all are real smart in this room, can smart people have faith? And I think that we put our faith in all kinds of things. I just think we better be very careful what we put our ultimate hope and ultimate trust in, right? And I think it's reasonable. One of the weeks we talked about, this was, I think, such a good conversation. We talked about this idea of how do we know that Jesus was even a real person, right? I mean, you come to church and you don't see him, right? You come to church and we talk about him, but how do we know he was actually a historical person? That's a good question, isn't it? And we talked about it. And my hope is, listen, I don't know if you're going to believe or not believe. I'm not sure where you're going to fall with all of that. But my hope is that when you walked out of here, you knew beyond a doubt that he existed and that claims were made about him, that his life was recorded, and you have to decide what you do with him. Is that cool? I think it's really important. Last week we began to ask questions about this book, the Bible. Remember we had a big stack of a couple hundred books up here, and we kind of asked this question: what's different about this book than all those books? What's different about this book than all the millions of books in the world? What's different about this book than all the other religious books even in our world? What makes the Bible unique? And even more importantly, listen to this. There's Christians in this room, I'm one of them, who believes that this is God's word to us. Now that sounds crazy to the world. It sounds crazy. I get it. It sounds nuts. But is it reasonable that smart people believe that? And we began to go after this a little bit last week. What I did was I just tried to search some of the biggest questions that people are asking. I'm trying to respond to what people are asking and doubting. And listen, we jumped in a couple of these topics. Like last week, for example, one of the big things that you can find on the internet is this idea that the Bible is full of contradictions. And if it's full of contradictions, that means it's hypocritical and it is a big fat lie. It's a big fat lie, right? There's all kinds of talk out there that the Bible is a historical fable, that it doesn't record accurately what happened in history. And that's just not true, right? If you were with us last week, you realize the overwhelming evidence is that it's not riddled with contradictions and it's not riddled with historical inaccuracies at all. It's just the opposite of that. Now, if you missed that, any of these weeks, I would encourage you to go back on the church app, get the church app. Come on, get the church app. And you can go to the App Store and go to Metro City Church, download that thing. Right on the very bottom, it says messages. Click right there. They are free, people. Free. This is a subject matter worth investigating. Amen? Listen, I can't think of a thing that's more important to figure out if it's a truth or a lie than this whole thing about God, about faith, about the Bible, about Jesus. You're in church, after all. You don't want to waste your life. You don't want to waste your time. If this is a big fat lie, then this is nothing more than a social gathering that is a waste of our effort. Amen? So I think this is worth talking about. Anybody with me? Yeah. So I read a crazy story this week. It blew my mind. And you're going to have to travel with me. Don't go getting mad at me until you hear the end of this story. Y'all with me? Don't go crazy on me, okay? I'm not sure when it was dated, but it was very, very recent. It was a headline in the Christian Post. The Christian Post used to be a booklet or a magazine that came out. Now it's online, and it kind of deals with modern topics, modern news from a Christian worldview, and it's called the Christian Post. And there was a headline that caught my attention. I'm just going to read the headline to you. Ready? It says, Iranian Christian convert fears execution if deported for giving wrong answers on Bible quiz. And that caught my attention. I'm like, whoa, we're like in this series right now talking about the legitimacy of the Bible. And I don't know if you've ever taken a Bible quiz or played a little Bible trivia. Anybody ever done anything like that? But my guess is if you have, you never thought if you got the answer wrong that you were going to be executed, right? So this is like pressure, right? True story. Listen to this. A guy named Reza Karka, he's a former Muslim. He converted to Christianity while living in his home country of Iran. Now, if you know anything about Iran, if you become a Christian and convert out of Islam, it is punishable. It's called a capital crime. That's what they call it, a capital crime. And it's punishable by immediate execution. Okay? And so Reza feared for his life. He converted to the Christian faith. He feared for his life. He escaped, and he found himself seeking political asylum in the United Kingdom, England, right? When he gets there, there is this meeting, this immigration hearing that was scheduled directly for Mr. Karka to see if his conversion story was true. And the judge in this case decided to give him, listen to this, a 150 question quiz about the Bible. And that just caught my attention, right? And his reasoning, he actually said his reasoning was very simple. If he couldn't pass this test, then his conversion to the Christian faith is not true, and thus he deserves to get sent back and face whatever he has to face, right? I'm thinking this, wow, listen. Now just travel with me for a second. I think that every country has the right to decide their immigration policies, okay? And I think it's also very reasonable that the people in charge of this stuff don't believe every immigration story, especially those seeking political asylum, right? As you may know, America and England and many, many places in the West have what we call political asylum laws. And England is just like America. They will take in people who in their home country are being persecuted for their religious beliefs, their political beliefs, or their ethnicity, right? And so there is a system that's set up in our country and many of the Western countries that take these people in and actually allow them to become citizens. Now, listen, my comments have nothing to do with immigration. Get that in your mind. So don't go putting anything on Facebook, okay? Nothing. It has to do with the why this is happening. Now, first of all, I just want to say this. I am not so sure that I could even pass a test of 150 Bible questions. And I've spent my lifetime trying to study this thing, right? Could you imagine the pressure of that? Like, you're going through a translator, you're here seeking asylum because you fear death. The law is very clear in Iran. You convert to Christianity, you're dead. But you're now seeking asylum, and you're given 150 questions about the Bible. How do you think you would do? Anybody? Like, you're really confident you're going to pass this thing, right? Well, probably not, right? But that's not really the real issue. I was thinking about this when I read this article. I was blown away. I was thinking to myself, America and England like America, are taking in literally tens of thousands of political asylum people every single month. Every single month. And do you realize, like in America, the vast majority of people that we give legal political asylum to, the vast majority are for this singular reason, religious persecution. Did you know that? And very few of them are Christians escaping their country. It's generally all these other religious groups, right? Which is great, okay? If they're being persecuted, we are a land of freedom. England's supposed to be a land of freedom. We take them in, and it's a good thing, right? Okay? So I was reading this, and I was thinking, wow, this is so strange to me. Why would this one man, because like America, England has almost like an open border. People are just pouring in every month by the tens of thousands. Most of them receive no case at all. Most of them don't show up in court at all. So what was going on that this Christian is leaving an Islamic country and seeking asylum in a country that you would think would be more friendly to Christians? But yet he's caught out and given this test to prove his case. Now, does anybody think that's just interesting? Does anybody at all just think, what in the world is going on? I would say it like this. What is so different about this book that puts the brakes on tens of thousands of people coming in and you go, you need to come here to court over this? You better prove that you know something about this book. What is so, let me ask it like this, what is so threatening about this book that this would even be a case? Anybody? I would just humbly say to you, that this book is different. There is something going on in culture that is afraid of this, that's trying to condemn this, that's trying to move the world completely and utterly away from this. And by the way, the last thing I could find about Reza Karka was that he actually did not pass his test. And so in this environment, he had a translator and he was given all these questions, and I can imagine the stress, but the judge actually noted that he got confused on which disciple betrayed Jesus. And so he hasn't made his decision yet on whether to send him back knowing that immediate execution would occur in Iran. So maybe we should just pray for Mr. Karka. Keep that in mind, will you? Y'all good? Y'all good? Come on. So last week, we talked about this idea that there seems to be this all-out assault against this book, and it's on media, it's on social media, and especially on college campuses. I talked about my college experience a little bit. And truthfully, a lot of people who say they believe in this book, people like many of us in this room, we don't really know why we believe this book. We just say we believe this book. And maybe what's worse than that is a whole bunch of us. We say we believe this book because we grew up believing this book. Our parents taught us to believe this book. This book was handed to us. And if our mama taught us, then mama's right. And we got to believe it. But friends, I think that all of us in this space are old enough and wise enough and mature enough to realize that just because our parents believe something doesn't necessarily make it something that we should build our whole life on, right? Especially something this important. Now, I trust my parents and I want what's best from them, and they've tried their best to teach me. But this is an issue that deserves study. This is an issue that you need to understand for yourself, because when somebody smarter than you, more aggressive than you, comes against the Bible, if you have faith, you will crumble. Amen? You will. You will crumble if you don't know why you believe what you believe. So, when this assault against the Bible comes your way in life, instead of the answer being, well, my mama told me so, maybe if the answer went like this, it would be different. What if we were to say, I choose to believe the Bible because it is a reliable collection of historical documents written by eyewitnesses during the lifetime of other eyewitnesses that reported supernatural events that took place in fulfillment of specific prophecies, and they claim that their writings are divine rather than of human nature or origin. Furthermore, I have personally investigated this, and I believe that my faith is reasonable. What if that was our answer instead? I think it would at least cause a different conversation. Like, for example, what if we were to say that I've studied this, I've figured out a few things, and I believe, now listen to me, I believe that my faith is as reasonable as your lack of faith. What if we were to say my faith is as reasonable as your disbelief, or my belief is as reasonable as your disbelief? Well, friends, I think that's possible to have that kind of position. And I think it's worth our study. Amen? You with me? So we're going to go a little bit further. Last week, we started talking about these apparent contradictions in the Bible. We started talking about the historical inaccuracies, but now I want to go a little further. Can we go further? All right. So welcome to class. Let's go. All right. Here's something that you hear all the time. And I know you've heard this. The Bible is so old. Oh my gosh, it's so old. How can we be sure that it hasn't been changed? Have you heard this before? Like the Bible's so old. Like it's written thousands of years ago. How can you trust it at all? I mean, it's gone from language to language, version to version, all this kind of stuff, century to century. Like, how do you trust it? Well, you may not realize this, but there is, and I'm going to try to prove this to you, an overwhelming amount of what they call manuscript evidence that points to the validity of the words that you hold today are a direct reflection of the original authors. Now, listen. This is really important stuff. You may not even know this, but there are people who have PhDs in the antiquity study, and their only job in life is to research what was found in history is actually accurate to history. Now, that's a crazy job, isn't it? Anybody with me on that? That would be to me, that would be the coolest job. Others of you guys would like, put a bullet in my head. That's terrible, right? Like, I think that would be awesome, okay? But I want to go into this a little bit. And without going too crazy deep on this, when I went to college, and like some of you went to college, my vein of college had a lot of theology and a lot of philosophy, even at the secular university, a lot of literature. I was in the humanities kind of department, if you will. And when I got to philosophy class, I was immediately assigned readings from some of the historical greats like Plato. Anybody ring a bell? Plato? Yes? Aristotle? Come on, Socrates. Homer wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey. Remember this? You got Julius Caesar wrote the Gallic Wars. And so we were assigned to read all this ancient literature and to process it and to think it through. But did you know there is almost no evidence that is directly from their time period written about their lives, about these authors? Almost none. Almost none. And yet we're told to read this and to trust that these works are a reflection of the original author. Did you know this? This is going to come as a surprise to you. We have zero ancient writings, like let's say from the year essentially 0 backwards or 100 back years of the original author's hand. We have no writings that Plato wrote, no writings that Socrates wrote, no writings that Aristotle, Julius Caesar, even Paul the Apostle, or any of the New Testament or Old Testament writers. None. We have no original writings at all. What we do have are these things called near originals. Near originals. From all that is researched, people can conclude that these are a fairly good reflection of what would have been stated in the original. They kind of line it up with witnesses and other collaborated writings and all this kind of stuff. So are we clear? There's no original writings. We have what they call near originals. Now here's what's amazing to me. Men like Plato and Aristotle, Socrates, all these other ancient writings, we literally have 10 copies roughly, give or take, of what they call near originals. And their near originals are roughly, listen to this, 1,000 years after they wrote it originally. And we call those near originals, 1,000 years later. Now, does that strike anybody as a little bit odd? And yet we go to college and we are told, trust this. This is Plato. This is Aristotle. Their philosophies are worth building your life around. But the Bible, oh, it's so old. You can't trust it. right? You hear this, right? You can't trust the Bible, it's so old. But trust Aristotle, trust Homer, trust the Gallic Wars by Julius Caesar. Trust all this stuff, right? Trust the Roman history. I want to show you something. This is going to blow your mind, okay? Put a little chart together. I just wanted to go up on the chart for a second. I want to point out a couple things. Homer is his manuscript evidence is second only to the Bible. In other words, we have more pieces of what they call near originals, no originals, but near originals to Homer than any other writing. Now listen to this. Look at this. When was Homer's Iliad written? 800 BC. 800 BC is when Homer actually lived and wrote his work. The nearest copy we have is in the year 400 BC, and it's only a fragmented copy. Okay? How many years difference is that? 400. That's the nearest thing. Now, if you were to expand that out a few more years, you have roughly what they call 643 ancient near original works. But you have to reach about 1,000 years after his death to get that many writings. Okay, now look at, cruise down here. Next couple people are very famous Greek historians. This is where we get so much of our history about Babylon, Assyria, all these people right there. But look at where they wrote. They wrote back in the 480 BC, but the nearest physical writing that we have, what they call near original, is in what year? 900 AD. By my math, that's roughly 1,300 years later. Would you consider that like a near original? Anybody, right? But we're told to believe this stuff. Go down to Plato. Plato is probably the most popular philosopher in the history of the world outside of Jesus. And he wrote in the year 400 BC, but the nearest writing we have to him is 900, not BC, but come on, AD. How many years is that? What's the gap? 1,300 years. And the same as Tacitus. Tacitus is one of Rome's most famous historians. Pliny is one of Rome's most famous historians. Their writings are 1,000 years later, and yet we trust them to give you all of Rome's history. Do you realize this? You trust that to give you all of Rome's history. But look at the Bible. Look at the Bible. We have many, many works that are what they call near originals that are dated between 23 years and 50 years after the death of the original writer. That's how early our writings are. We have several hundred like that. And if you were to go just 225 years out, now remember this, 225 years out, those are called near originals. We have roughly 5,366 either whole books or partial books of just the New Testament. Now listen to this. If you were to take the same standards that were applied to Plato and Socrates and go 1,300 years out for their near originals, you would have over 15,000 handwritten, meticulously copied reproductions of the New Testament and over 24,000 of the Old Testament, if the same standards were applied. But again, you go to college and you're going, oh, trust Aristotle, trust Plato, trust Homer. It's all the right stuff. It's right there. We got copies. See, it's a book. It's on your computer. It's right there. But don't believe that Bible. Don't believe the Bible. Well, the truth is, the Bible is the most documented historical piece of antiquity that all of humanity has. Period. End of discussion. Period. You have to understand this. There's no more research book in the history of the world. Now listen, little side note story. Recently, my family went to Washington, D.C. We went to the Museum of the Bible. I don't know if you've heard of this place yet. Now listen, we're there, and I hear about this place, and I'm thinking, okay, well, maybe we go check it out, but then I find out there's a $20 ticket charge. And you know what? I'm allergic to spending money, okay? It's just how it is, okay? And I'm like, oh my gosh, there's 5 of us, that's $100, and throw lunch and parking in there. This is like, oh my, you know. And then, of course, you know, my wife reminds me that I'm a pastor and we're Christians and maybe we should support this thing and let's just do it. And so, you know, we go and we expect to spend an hour or 2 there, maybe 3 at the most, and, you know, spend the morning there or whatever. And we go in there. We end up spending the whole day. And I'm going to tell you something. Now, this is saying something for teenagers who have grown up around all this and young adults who have grown up around all this. And all of us, including my kids, it would not be an underestimation to say we were blown out of our minds. This place was incredible. They spent $500 million. Did you hear this? $500 million on one museum. $523 million, almost over $500 million. And I'm thinking to myself, What could you spend $500 million on? Just throw a couple old Bibles out there and go, hey, there you go, right? That's what I'm thinking. No, listen. They have gathered all of the greatest scholars on earth to contribute to an unbelievable archaeological, manuscriptal, and historical documentation of the entire Bible from day one. It will blow your mind, and it is laid out so creatively and so good, it'll just literally blow you away. They talk about this kind of stuff. They talk about, where do we get this stuff from? Who is the translators? How do we know it was handed down perfectly? With this piece was found, did it correlate with this piece that was found? And they link all of this stuff together, and it just goes, boom. Your mind just goes, boom, right? But even more so, friends, this museum called the Museum of the Bible, it does an unbelievable job about how the Bible is alive today and changing lives all over the world today. It talks about the cultural effect and the world effect that the scriptures have had on the thinking of humanity for thousands and thousands of years. If you have a chance to go to Washington, D.C., I'm telling you, skip the zoo and go to the Bible Museum. Y'all good? Y'all good? All right, so rest assured that this just wasn't like dropped out of the internet. Just rest assured. You can know with absolute certainty that this book has been meticulously preserved for you, and it is reliable. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to believe it. It doesn't mean that you have to believe what it teaches, but you can understand and know with certainty that it is historical. Manuscript evidence is abounding. This is the best book in all of human history that has been preserved. Y'all with me so far? Okay. All right, 3 people are on board with that. That's great. Okay, so listen to this. Let's go further. A lot of people I've talked to, they'll say stuff like this, like, okay, fine. I can't argue with the history. I believe it's a good translation. I believe that all your dates and are right in there and all that kind of stuff. I believe that there's no contradictions. I get all that. Okay, you proved all that. But listen, my hang up is not any of that. My hang up is all those stupid miracles in the Bible, right? That's a legit thing. So here's what people say. Isn't it crazy for smart people to believe in miracles, right? Because why? There's a bunch of smart people in this room, and a bunch of us have never seen these kinds of miracles, at least, right? You go, huh? Some guy walked on water? You really believe that? Jeremy, you're a smart guy. You really believe that somebody was blind but was made to see? You really believe that Jesus went there and turned water into wine? Come on, bro. You're smarter than that, right? I get it. I think those are fair questions. And here's my response. We're going to get philosophical. You ready to get philosophical? Say philosophical. Okay. Here's my response. You have to make a distinction between God and what's recorded about God. Now, let me explain this. I have no problem, by definition, saying that God is a non-contingent, all-powerful, limitless creator of the entire world. And what that means is this. If he's God, he's capable of doing things that I'm not capable of. Okay, now listen, I'm not saying you have to believe God, okay? But if, we can all agree, if there is a thing called God, then that God has to be different than us. Yes? Otherwise, you're God, and I know you're not God, okay? You're not good enough to be God. But if there is a God, that God should be capable of doing extraordinary things. Yes or no? So if there's a God, would it be normal that that God could interject into what is nature and call it supernatural, right? He could take what is natural and change it because by definition, he is God. So I happen to believe in God. You may not, but if there's a God, then miracles are merely recreational activities for an almighty God. Did you hear this? If there is a God, the miracles are merely recreational activities for an almighty God. And the writers of the Bible, both Old and New Testament, were charged with the task of recording the events of that day, and they recorded what they saw. It's not their fault that God was doing extraordinary things. They just recorded what they saw, right? Now think about this for a second. The Bible was written over 1,600 years. It's a time period, 1,600 years, a long, long, long time. The Bible is sort of the highlight reel of what God was doing in humanity to give us the story, the ongoing story of God. Now think about this. Any football fans in the house? Right? My understanding is that there are literally thousands of hours of football played every weekend. Am I right about that? Thousands of hours, college, professional football, right? Thousands of hours. They record it all on television. And then they break it down to this 1-2 minute highlight reel. And the catches are extraordinary, right? Some guy's flipping through the air, catches the ball, one hand behind his back, and, jumps over 49 guys, and, all this crazy stuff, right? You see these amazing passes, amazing catches. Is that every play in football? No, it's the highlight reel, right? They take the best of the best and they show you the highlight reel. The Bible is the highlight reel of what God was doing in humanity. And the writers see these highlights and they go, whoa, I'm gonna write that one down because I don't really see people walking on water too often. I'm gonna write that one down, right? Does that make sense? So they're tasked with the charge of writing down this. But furthermore, and I want you to really dig into this a little bit, they wrote when other eyewitnesses were still alive, right? They were still alive. And it could have been very easy for people to go, come on, bro, that's not what happened at all. And in that day and age, they wouldn't be as merciful as Americans as we are now, where we just laugh people and cancel them off the internet. They would have killed them. It's a totally different world, people. They would have been like, you're lying to us, And but that's not what happened at all. Words started to circulate, writing started to circulate, preaching started to happen, and people were going, do you remember when we were in Capernaum and Jesus took that water and turned it into wine? Hello, the guy was dead, now rises from the grave, and you saw it. People didn't go, no, bro. What happened? It says the whole world caught on fire. The gospel went forward to the whole world. People started to believe it from one end to the other because they started to put the pictures together and they started to remember, oh yeah, that is what happened. This is what happened. And Jesus was who he said he was, right? Nobody left it out of town. So listen, let me just tell you like this. Let's just say, for example, I was to write a book, okay? And I'm going to write about the 9/11 event. What is that, 20 years ago, right? 20 years ago. Anybody remember 9/11? Anybody at all in the room? Does anybody remember seeing it on television? Right? Does anybody know somebody who was in New York at that time? Anybody at all? Okay, so you all are witnesses, right? Yes? Yes, you're witnesses. You saw it on television. Hello. Many people know people who were standing there. Maybe you were in New York at that time, right? So there were all these witnesses, right? So what if I was to write a book like this? Man, you guys remember back in 9/11, 2001, all the people were in New York and they had television back then and you could see it for yourself and all these videos recording and man, do you remember what happened? I mean, you were there and I started naming people. You were there, you were a witness, you saw it, right? You did see it. And I started naming these people. What if I was to say this? And you remember exactly what happened. That UFO came down. You remember this, you saw it. And it started floating around the city. You remember that, right? And people going, wow, there's a UFO floating around the city. And that UFO, I remember it stopped above the trade centers. And it just hovered there for like a half hour, bro. You were there. You remember. You saw it on television. I know you saw it. And then all of a sudden, this little Star Wars gun thing came out. And it starts going, pew, 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 lasers. And it shot the trade center. And the whole thing just blew up. And it fell to the ground and all those people died and dust went everywhere and you were there, remember this? What would you say? You've lost your ever-loving mind. That's not what happened at all, right? There would be no publisher on earth that would have taken that story. None. Because why? All these witnesses go, what you talking about, bro? You're wrong. You've lost your mind, right? The same is true with miracles. The exact same story, the exact same storyline is true. And then I want you to think about one more thing. Each of the writers, each of them in the New Testament, they write these accounts about Jesus' life, his teachings, his moral teachings, his leadership, but they include these stories of miraculous events. right? So they diverge. And it would have been so much safer if they would have just kept the moral good, be nice teaching, right? But instead they diverge into these miracles. And let me tell you something. Every single one of them paid the price with their life. And we said this a couple weeks ago. I don't know anyone who would willingly die for something that they know is a lie. Do you? Do you? No. No, these men died because of what they saw. And that's my story. And they're like, I'm sticking to it, right? Y'all with me so far? All right, we got to talk about one more thing, and this is going to blow your mind. You ready to have your mind blown? Okay, this is my favorite subject right here, okay? I want to talk about an area that the Bible speaks about that really freaks people out in the culture. People say this, all that talk, all that Bible talk about prophecy sounds a little bit too much like Hollywood. People say, you Christian people, you're nice people, but you're just weird. You literally believe that people wrote things and said things in advance that later came true. You're really smart, Jay. Why do you believe that? That's weird. That's weird, strange. Anybody with me? That's strange, right? But friends, I absolutely believe it to be true because I've studied it over and over and over. Again, the Bible is written over the 1600-year time period. And in that time period, these writers made bold predictions in their time and space that later came true in the next time and space. And so how do you explain this other than the act of God or God's hand? For example, we're Christians. Many of us are Christians, not all of us, but many of us are Christians. And our faith is centered around the coming Messiah. His name is Jesus, right? Well, hundreds of years, particularly in Isaiah and Ezekiel, a little bit in Jeremiah, but many of the prophets, Daniel, David, they spoke of this coming Messiah over and over again. And they were very specific. They literally said that this Messiah is going to come in the line of certain people. And they named the people. This is who's going to produce this Messiah, the genealogy of this family. And then this Messiah is going to be born of a virgin. And they said, oh, by the way, this Messiah is going to be born in a little town called Bethlehem. And he's going to be born in a time and space where the government will be so oppressive on the people of Israel, and he's the culmination of their Messiah, and they are going to oppress him. Does anybody remember that when Jesus was born, the Roman government killed all the 2-year-old babies, trying to eliminate him? I want to talk about oppression, right? Being on his shoulders, right? And they go on and they say that this Messiah is going to teach and have such an influence on the people that's going to turn their religious system upside down. That he's going to eventually be persecuted, arrested, put to death, and they were very specific that he would not only be put to death by the government, but at the hands of religious people. Think about that. At the hands of the government, but at the hands of the religious people at the same time. And then they say he's going to rise from the grave 3 days later, and a whole bunch of people are going to see it. Okay? Now, I think I could show you enough chapter and verse, if I had all the time in the world, that I could prove that to you. That would be pretty overwhelming to me where you go, that's weird. Not the weird I thought it was, but that's weird how true that is, okay? But I want to take you into a completely secular account of history, okay? That this is going to blow your mind, okay? I'm going to read to you from the Prophet Ezekiel. Now, Ezekiel was writing in about 550 to 600 BC, and he tells of the destruction of one of the major cities in the world. It was a city called Tyre. Have you ever heard of the ancient city called Tyre? Not Tyre, Tyre, okay? And it was one of the great cities of the world. They called it a kingdom state. In other words, it wasn't an expansive empire. It was this, singular kind of stronghold city. And it's interesting, when Ezekiel writes this, the city of Tyre has already been in existence for about 1,000+ years. So at this time, it had plenty of time to fortify, to get bigger and bigger and become a metropolis of its day, okay? But Ezekiel comes along and says, you, Tyre, are going to be utterly destroyed. And I just simply want to read his predictions to you. Can I do this? I just want to read his predictions to you, and then I want to talk about what happened, okay? So, in Ezekiel 26, he writes, starting in verse 3, therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says, I am against you. So prophets' jobs were to hear the voice of God and to preach to the people. It's sort of like a pastor's job. Okay, and I'm not saying I'm a prophet, nothing like that, but what if I was to come before you each week, you learn to trust me a little bit, and you are making a reasonable assertion that I'm communing with the Lord and teaching biblical truth, and I was to come and say, downriver, I got bad news. I have come against you, says the Lord. You are in trouble, Taylor. You are in trouble downriver. Like you are in deep trouble. You don't even know what's about to hit you, okay? It kind of make you go, that's a little bit different, right? Okay, now listen to what happens. He says, the Lord has spoken to me. I am against you. Oh, Tyre, he names the city, right? And I will bring, say this word with me. I will bring, come on. I will bring, say it. Okay, many. Remember that, many, not one. How many? Many, right? We don't know how many, but there's more than one, right? Many. I would take that as more than three, okay? So many nations against you, like the sea casting up its waves. In other words, it's one after another after another. Do you see what's going on here? So he's getting more specific. They will destroy the what? The walls of Tyre, and they will pull down her towers. I will scrape away her rubble and make her like a bare rock. Y'all see this? Pretty plain. He's saying, you're in trouble. You got this big city built, and it's about ready to come down. Can you see that in there? Everybody say yes. Okay, now, he goes out and he says, out in the sea, not on land, but out in the sea, she will become a place to spread fish nets. Keep that in mind. For I have spoken, declares the sovereign Lord. She will become plunder for the nations, not nation, but nations, many nations, right? And her settlements on the, say this word, mainland will be ravaged by the sword. They will know that I am the Lord. For this is what the sovereign Lord says. Then he gets very specific. He says, from the, come on, say it. From the, oh, there we go. From the north. He's very specific. He goes, not south, but there's an empire coming from the north. You haven't quite heard of them yet. You've heard rumors about them, but I'm going to tell you who it is in advance. Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, king of kings. Now, what's interesting, when Ezekiel is writing this, he was a contemporary to the rise of the Babylonian Empire. Nebuchadnezzar hadn't quite established the empire yet, but it was coming. So some people say, well, maybe Ezekiel can just see the obvious. Maybe he can just see the obvious. There's no indication historically at this time that Nebuchadnezzar is going to attack Tyre, but people are going, well, maybe he was just a little bit brighter than everybody else and could see the political winds coming, and eventually this army from the north, the Babylonians, are going to get so big that they're going to come and crush Tyre. Okay, fine. Okay, just keep that in mind, okay? So then it says this. This guy, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, with horses and chariots, with horsemen and a great army, he will ravage, where? Your settlements on the mainland. Very specific, right? With the sword, and will set up siege works against you. He will build a ramp up to your walls and raise his shield against you. He will direct his blows of the battering rams against your walls and demolish your towers with his weapons. His horses will be so many that they will cover you with dust. Your walls will tremble at the noise of the war horses, wagons, and chariots when he enters your gates as men enter a city whose walls have been broken through. The hoofs of his horses will trample all of your streets. He will kill all your people with the sword, and he will pull your strong pillars down, and they will fall to the ground. They will plunder your wealth and loot. Now listen, it's interesting. Now there's a shift here a little bit. Now they will plunder, it's not one nation, it's plural, right? So he's writing in a plural form, but spends time on a singular nation. Then goes back to a plural, they will plunder your merchandise, loot all your wealth, and they will break down your walls. I thought Nebuchadnezzar just did all that. Okay? Now listen. It says, they'll knock down your walls, demolish your fine houses, and throw stones and timber and rubble into the, come on. Now last one, Nebuchadnezzar flattened it all. Anybody remember this? We just read it, right? He flattened it all. But these people, these nations, they are going to do something different. They're going to knock down your walls, so apparently something's going to be rebuilt. They're going to knock it down. But this time, they're not just going to knock it down. They're going to throw it into the, come on, sea. Now, just remember this, right? I will put an end to your noisy songs and the music of your harps. It will be heard no more. Apparently, God did not like the top 40 of Tyre, okay? Must have been some rap stuff going on. I didn't say that. I did not say that. Come on. 14, verse 14. I will make you, listen to this, I will make you a bare rock, and you will become a place to spread fish nets. What do you do with the fish net? You throw them into the sea, you bring them out, you dump all the fish, you clean off all the junk, and then you spread them on the rock to dry them out, to reuse them, to organize them again. You understand what's going on here, right? He says, I'm going to make out in the sea a barren rock for you to spread the nets. Now follow this. You will never be rebuilt, for I am the Lord God, I have spoken, declares the sovereign Lord. Now, according to this prophecy, we know a few things, right? It doesn't look good for Tyre. Amen. We can all agree with that, okay? He makes detailed predictions. He calls the city by name. He tells that not one, but many nations are going to come against Tyre. He singles out the first nation, right? He called them Babylon. He says, there's a nation coming. You're not too familiar with it, but they're coming. King Nebuchadnezzar names a specific king, right? He says that there's going to be this first crushing where they knock it all down. Then apparently it's going to be rebuilt, and there's going to be another crushing where they knock it all down, and then they throw it into the sea. Interesting. And then these fishermen are going to have a place that is like a dry rock to spread their nets. That's how barren it's going to be. Okay, now, what you need to know is this. At the time that Tyre was spoken of by Ezekiel, it was one of the great cities on planet Earth. History records it as, quote, being an impregnable city. Its walled fortresses were unsurmountable. What you need to know is that Tyre was not a mainland city. It was actually an island about a half a mile off the coast of what we call modern-day Syria. You can go and look at it on a map today. You can stand on the shore and look out a half a mile, and there's an island there. That island used to be the world's greatest metropolis called Tyre at the time. It was a port city that was the center of commerce around the ancient world. Okay, now follow this. This city grew and grew. By the time Ezekiel is writing, this city's already 1,000 years old. What do we know about ancient cities? They kept building what? Up as they go. They build a wall and they build up around that wall, right? This city expanded so much that there was another island next to the island of Tyre, and like just an eighth of a mile away, kind of like Groseal, right? Where they got all these little canals cutting things apart, whatever. Well, there was a big canal about the size of like Detroit River, and they look across and say, we want that island to become our island. And so they history says they drag dirt and debris from the mainland, and they connect these two islands, and they end up building their wall around the whole thing as one big island. That island was about 2.5 miles circumference around this island. The walls, history records that they were 150 feet tall. That's a wall. And we are discussing a wall in America. That's a wall. Okay? And that wall was to keep the bad guys out. It surrounded the edge. And so they thought, we are impregnable because you got to attack us by boat. We're on this wall. We're just going to drop little rocks onto your boat, right? You're not going to win. And then nobody took them down for centuries. For centuries. Well, the island of Tyre became such a powerful nation, or city-state they call it, that they spilled over to the mainland. Now you see this in modern day America, right? You got Mackinac Island, which is the main draw, but it spills over to the mainland, Mackinac City, right? And so this is all over the world, right? Where they have these island fortresses that they retreat to because they're hard to take an island because you're coming on boat, right? And so they expand onto the mainland, it grows and grows, and now they have a fortified mainland. And so the people of Tyre are thinking, wow, we got the walls, we got the island, we got the ocean, and we got a first line of defense called the mainland. They got to get through them to get to us. Well, here's how history records this. One of the guys I mentioned earlier on the screen, his name is Herodotus. He was a ancient historian, one of the most popular, one of the most prolific writers in ancient history. Remember, we have his works that are dated hundreds of years later, but he originally wrote during this time. Okay, and here's what he writes, that Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, laid siege to Tyre from the years 585 to 572. Now, what's really interesting is this. He goes on to explain that Babylon rose as an empire and expanded and basically saw this major city. And what do kings that are expanding say? I want that for myself. So he marches the armies of Babylon to the mainland. He attacks the mainland, knocks down their walls, and takes that city. He can't seem to penetrate the island. All the people retreat to the island. Now they're at the island. So what does history record? And what did Ezekiel say? They laid siege to their city. They laid siege to their city. History records that they laid siege for 13 years. What happens for 13 years inside of a walled city? In 13 years, the people start to starve. You cannot produce enough in an enclosed space like that. So eventually, history records that the king of Tyre approached Nebuchadnezzar after 13 years. He finally gave up, and they made a deal. Very interesting deal. History records that Nebuchadnezzar's armies never stepped foot on the island, but the king agreed to pay tribute to Babylon. So as long as Babylon was a country or an empire, it shows every year the king of Tyre paid a tribute to the armies and the people of Babylon, a tax. Does that make sense? Okay, so what happened? Ezekiel says that an army called Nebuchadnezzar is going to come, destroy your mainland settlements, but not the island. What does history show? Exactly that. Now, we're going to fast forward 200 years. This is good, right? Y'all with me? This is good. You ain't heard nothing yet. Because in the year 333 BC, a couple hundred years later, another great nation empire rose, the Greek Empire. Anybody remember this? Who was their most famous leader? Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great was a nutcase. Okay, he literally believed that the whole world was his. Everything belonged to him. Like everything. Your wife belonged to him. Your kids belonged to him. Everything belonged to Alexander. That's what he believed, right? And so once Babylon falls, the island of Tyre is still going. It's thriving. They rebuild the mainland city, and it's booming, it's booming. And guess what Alexander says? I want that for myself. So he sends the armies of Greece in 333, it's recorded in history, that he goes and he destroys the mainland. It says twice that they'll destroy your mainland. But eventually, something else happens. It says, out in the sea, it will become like a barren rock, right? So Alexander destroys the mainland, and he, like Nebuchadnezzar, figures out that he can't take that island. He can't take it. He's tried for years. He can't take it. So here's what he does. He's a nut. He's a nut. He orders that the armies of the Greeks literally take all the buildings that they knock down, all the rubble, all the debris, and dump it into the sea. And literally, he builds 1 foot at a time to march to that island fortress. History records that he builds so wide, so tall that it, quote, pushes back the sea. In other words, he built a dam, a dike, right? One of the early inventors of the diking system. And so he builds it out. He moves all of his armies onto this now oceanfront property, right, in the ocean. He moves all his, and he says he builds battering ram and siege devices. And he begins to tear down the strong towers of Tyre. Eventually, Tyre falls. He marches in, becomes the new king of Tyre. What did Ezekiel say? What did he say? Eventually, it's going to fall. Eventually, it falls. But he doesn't say just one nation. He doesn't just say 2 nations. He says, anybody remember? Many nations. Now, let's fast forward in history a little bit. History records, and I just picked a few of them, but history records that the Seleucid Empire, the Roman Empire, and hear of any of these people? These names ring a bell at all to you? And the Muslim Crusaders all attacked and captured that city. And here it is. You go to that city today. You can Google this. You can go to Syria and go visit this place. This metropolis, once called Tyre, is now a remote fishing village, a half mile off the coast, where people spread their fish nets and make a living as fishermen. And I just say that, how can that be if God's hand wasn't in it? And this is just one of many that we could talk about. All right? Class is dismissed. We got to go. But I hope that you join me next week because we're not done. And I hope that you'll invite somebody. I hope that you'll invite somebody, okay? Because I think people need to examine this stuff for themselves. Would you do that? Would you go on Facebook and check in? Get your phone out and check in. Come on, get your phone out and check in on Facebook and Instagram and let the world know that you're here, that you're proud of going to church, that you're glad to be going to church. Amen? If you want to pray with somebody up to my left, to your right, one of the most important things we do, if there's something heavy on your soul, we want to talk with you. We want to lift you up. We don't want to lecture you or beat you down. But right over here, if you want to pray with somebody, we would love to meet with you. God bless you guys. Let's go.